Stop me if you've heard this one before. If movie studios can truly crack the formula on adapting video games to film, they'll have a new lease on life. Yeah, I think I've been hearing people say this ever since they started turning video games into movies, and it hasn't exactly come true yet. The thing is, we really are at the start of a new era of blockbuster movies. The Mario movies, the Sonic movies, Minecraft, Five Nights at Freddy's, Iron Lung, all of these have made a major splash at the box office, and I really don't think there's any sign of video game movie adaptations slowing down. But what's the difference between a random hit here or there and video games becoming the next big thing that will replace the hole that fading superhero movies have left at theaters? Join me on this trip into the history of video game movies, and what I think could be a very bright future. Video games go back way further than you may realize, with the super primitive Tennis for Two from the 1950s predating even Atari's Pong from 1972. But when people think about the start of the true modern video game, they think about the 1980s, and video games like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and the video game that kicked off the adaptation craze, Super Mario Bros. By the early 90s, Nintendo's Mario games had evolved from the arcade cabinet of Donkey Kong and through 6 different main Super Mario games on multiple consoles. So it's not a surprise that one of the most popular and famous games of the time was a hot movie property, eventually made by Hollywood Pictures and a lot of supporting studios. Only, this movie has barely any resemblance to the bright and colorful fantasy adventure games of the series. According to screenwriter Parker Bennett, our take on it was that Nintendo interpreted the events from our story and came up with the video game. We basically worked backwards. It's such a weird approach to putting a massively popular game on screen, but this overall idea of wanting all the name recognition and fame from a game and none of its actual content would define a lot of game adaptations in the next few decades. Now, I know there's a lot of nostalgia these days for the live-action Mario movie because nostalgia comes in 30-year waves and warps brains, but whatever you may think about it, the movie was 1. A big financial disappointment, 2. Savaged by critics, and 3. Hated by Nintendo and Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Afterward, it was rumored that Nintendo quietly banned any more film adaptations of their games, and yeah, the proof is all there, with another Nintendo-related film not happening until 2019's Detective Pikachu. Skipping ahead exactly 3 decades, and the debut of Illumination's animated Super Mario Bros. Movie couldn't possibly be further removed from the live-action adaptation, and I think it says a lot about just how much video game adaptations have changed. Whether you like the 1993 movie or not, it's essentially Super Mario in name and very vague concept only. It's much more like if someone got hit in the head with a hammer and then tried to remake Blade Runner. It's dark and gritty and, for the lack of a better term, weird. 2023's Super Mario looks exactly like the games, stuffs its film full of Easter eggs, characters, and powers from decades of history, and tries to give its audience exactly what they want from a Mario movie. A Mario movie should be a constantly moving adventure. A Mortal Kombat movie should be shockingly bloody but a little silly. A Five Nights at Freddy's movie should be poorly made and full of nonsensical lore. And they are. Of course, animation means adaptation can be a lot closer to the game experience. When you try to make a live-action movie look just like a big, colorful video game, you can come off really goofy, but more on that in a few minutes. All to say, video game movies from the 90s and 2000s were pretty weird, save for a few films that were true hits. And it's these few decades of video game adaptations essentially wandering in the wilderness that set the precedent for how people thought about these types of movies. And this bad reputation was kinda earned. For the sake of staying focused, let's mostly talk about theatrically released films. Movies like Stephen E. D'Souza's Street Fighter and Paul W.S. Anderson's Mortal Kombat are painfully cheesy, but I think that works really well in the case of Mortal Kombat. No, it doesn't have the crazy blood and guts that made the games a sensation, but this looks and feels exactly like those early games. It's really fun, and its dumbness adds to its fun. They were also big hits, along with the Angelina Jolie-led Lara Croft movies from 2001 and 2003, a franchise mostly built on the idea of an attractive woman playing an attractive character, but those were also big-budget films that were looking to be action crossovers with a recognizable lead. After that, it gets pretty dire, and the 2000s were filled with really bad, really cheap adaptations. House of the Dead, Alone in the Dark, DOA, Blood Rain, A Dungeon Siege Tale, Postal, Tekken, Need for Speed, Far Cry, Hitman, these are all pretty bad. A lot of these were made for cheap and made by the man, the myth, the hack legend himself, Uwe Boll. Not that any of these franchises would have necessarily become massive hits, but when a genre is closely linked with Uwe Boll for a decade, you know things aren't going well. Take a look at all the direct-to-video sequels to these movies, and you can see why game adaptations took such a hard nosedive so fast. There's also the Resident Evil movies of the time, with Anderson and Mila Jovovich essentially hijacking the franchise for a run of films that barely had anything to do with the games for a solid 15 years. But these movies made a lot of money, some hitting $300 million, and I actually like quite a few of them, so they continue to justify their own existence to the studios. Resident Evil Afterlife and Retribution are bangers, people. Alongside that, the 2000s and early 2010s were the time of adaptation in name only. Like, why does The Rock and Carl Urban star in Doom have mutants instead of demons? They said they put a first-person sequence in because they love the fans, but the rest of the movie makes me feel like they hate me. Max Payne is a weird mishmash of the games that really doesn't feel like its own unique story. But another challenge of turning a game heavily inspired by movies into a movie itself is trying to give it its own identity. Max Payne is like Hardboiled, The Maltese Falcon, and The Killer, but now you can play as the cliché central hero. Turn that back into a movie, and what makes it different from those? The same goes for Uncharted and the eventual Call of Duty movie. The first Silent Hill movie is a more positive example of an adaptation doing its own thing and being pretty good. It nails the horror and atmosphere, but the story doesn't really adhere to what the games had defined as this world. Still, I think it's a pretty effective horror movie on its own. The sequels, not so much. At some point, being a video game adaptation was enough to already be seen as being a bad movie before your adaptation was even made, and so I think that a lot of movie studios just kinda gave up before they even began and relegated these types of movies to being low-budget productions with not a lot of effort put in. But even the infrequent big studio pictures like Prince of Persia and Warcraft still have that stink on them of a time when video game adaptation immediately put a negative lens on your film. And I think that's partially why, despite both of those movies doing well in theaters, neither got a sequel. Sure, neither movie is great, but since when has that stopped studios from making another movie when a film is profitable? So what changed? Well, studios slowed way down on making video game adaptations, with just 1 or 2 a year being made outside of some straight-to-streaming animated stuff. And while there were still plenty of misses, you can see the attitude to these types of movies start to change. Instead of just taking video games that hadn't been popular in years and turning them into a movie that they just kind of squirt out for some content, you begin to see a lot more big budget, high quality approaches to these types of video game movies, even though still a lot of these don't work. I think both Assassin's Creed at Fox and Tomb Raider at Warner Brothers are both examples of the studio kinda having everything they need. Popular series, recognizable stars, big budget to support the vision, and the end product just not quite being what the fans wanted or the studios needed from ticket sales. The Assassin's Creed movie is once again doing that old adaptation approach of refusing to give audiences what they already loved about the games. No one likes the modern parts of the games in the first place. Please don't make this the major part of your movie. And Tomb Raider, while given new life by the gritty modern reboot games and using this for the new approach, doesn't have the juice it once had. Still, I think that these are part of studios rethinking what a game movie could be. Also, this is the time when video game companies became much more involved with the production of these types of films. No more selling off rights to their properties and just hoping that something good would be made. Nintendo co-produces the Mario movies with Illumination and Universal. PlayStation has created its own PlayStation production studio for adaptations of its major properties. Capcom is co-producing the new Street Fighter movie. Even Rovio, the smartphone game company, produces the Angry Birds movies. And of course there's Markiplier, who is the driving force as the writer, director, and star of the adaptation of Iron Lung, which is a fascinating example of influencer, game, and fans coming together to make a true indie hit. Of course, a video game studio taking a gamble and spending plenty of money on developing a movie studio is a big risk. Years ago, Square created Square Pictures to create Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within and begin their own motion capture heavy line of films, only for that movie's financial failure to immediately shut down their brand new, super expensive studio. This is probably why most every video game adaptation with a developer's involvement is a co-production between game studio and movie studio. One brings the property and the demand for some degree of fidelity to the source material, the other brings the experience of creating films. Half the investment, half the risk, double the profit. And that leads us to what I think is the true modern era of successful video game adaptations, and there are a few defining characteristics to it. First, fans have shown that if the filmmakers try to do right by the games, they'll show up. Remember Ugly Sonic? Backlash to this terrible redesign was so strong that the Sonic team rushed to fix the design, possibly a marketing move. And I think that really created a lot of goodwill from fans of the franchise and helped to make the first movie a hit. The next two Sonic movies pushed even harder into the property by using elements and characters from the games, and each has made even more money than the last. The Sonic movie franchise is a bona fide hit at theaters, but it could have fallen on its face in its first movie. In the aftermath, game adaptations have been much more likely to remain closer to the source material, and that automatically creates more excitement from fans. Think of it this way, video game movies are finally doing what made the early days of the MCU popular, bringing the stories and characters that fans love to life with new twists that make them unpredictable, while still being true to the spirit of why they became popular. But for decades, these video game movies were more like the Captain America movie from 1990, where the Red Skull was Italian and Cap tried to trick people by pretending to puke before he stole their car. And that leads us to a couple major factors: the slow decline of superhero movies, and COVID-19 shutting down movie theaters for the better part of a year, which has led to both theaters and studios looking for a suitable replacement that are going to bring major audiences in to watch a new film. Ultimately, I think this is what has led a lot of studios to try out video game adaptations and to wait to see if it's going to actually work. And if you look at the last few years, the proof is all there for a new major investment from these companies. The proof for the boom cycle is all there. Here's the top 10 highest grossing video game movies ever made. The Super Mario Bros. Movie at $1.3 billion, a Minecraft movie at $957 million, Super Mario Galaxy at $894 million and climbing, Sonic 3 at $489 million, Warcraft at $439 million, Detective Pikachu at $433 million, Rampage at $428 million, Sonic 2 at $405 million, Uncharted at $401 million, and the Angry Birds movie at $352 million. Notice something? All of those are from the last 10 years, and when you keep going down the list, the next 10 are still mostly from 2015 and sooner. That's really all you need to know about why big studios are all in on video game adaptations now. The dry spell of bad movies, bad box offices, and mad fans is finally over. Compare that to where superhero movies have found themselves post-2020, with the biggest hits in the genre dropping from billion-dollar grosses and now hitting somewhere between 400 and 600 million. You can see where the tide is beginning to turn regarding where studios are focusing. Sure, we'll still have Marvel and DC movies for years to come, but I think you'll see a lot less superhero movies coming from studios outside of Disney and Warner Brothers, and more of a focus on what games can become a new popular franchise for them. The one advantage these game adaptations have: no cinematic universe fatigue. Because people are getting pretty tired of that these days. Sure, we might get a few crossovers, but these games stand on their own and also feel very different from one another. Horror, action, adventure, comedy, fantasy, sci-fi, game adaptations can fit into any of these genres, and they don't need to just take a little bit of this genre and sprinkle it on top of a pre-existing formula, which is what I think that superhero movies kept running into year over year. But this will always be the major challenge of any game adaptation: Why should I go out and pay to see a movie version of something that I already have at home and can play whenever I want? Well, if the movie sucks, then people aren't going to go out and see it, or at least aren't going to go out and see it after that first weekend, and they're definitely not going to go out and see a sequel. Instead, you gotta give me a real reason to go out and see this movie. What's it gonna bring? What's special? What's exciting? And it better not feel like I'm stuck at my cousin's who isn't taking turns and letting me play God of War, and instead just watch them play the game. Bring the action, bring the drama, and bring me these really unique worlds and make them feel fresh, and please don't be boring. The worst thing that a movie could be is boring. The worst thing that a video game could be is made by EA. So try not to do both at the same time. When looking at where video game movies are now, I think you can separate them into 3 categories. And whether or not studios are actively trying to follow this format, I think it's working pretty well. First, you've got kid-focused films. These are movies like Detective Pikachu, a Minecraft movie, the Angry Birds movie, and the new Super Mario Bros. Movies. Hyper-colored and kind of frenetic, but mostly faithful adaptations of games that kids love to play. These are broadly appealing and have a baked-in fan base that are also starving for a new kids movie in theaters. And most of these are based on games that are so popular that they kinda sell themselves. These days, video games massively outsell movies, and I think movie studios are desperate to catch up. Next, you've got the mainstream movies. These can be a little more mature and they can range from PG to R, but I think the sweet spot is probably PG-13. Silent Hill, Hitman, Sonic the Hedgehog, Resident Evil, and Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, this is easily the category that has the most films that can be put here, which means 2 things. There's a lot of bad movies in the category that did poorly, and this is where movies run the biggest risk of being really bland and forgettable. I think the studio instinct here is to make them as broadly appealing as possible, but also to lose what made them popular in the first place. Let's face it, studio executives think they know better than the audience. And sometimes they do, but I think a long history of failed game adaptations have proved that in this area, they don't. That's not to say fans know best either. Frankly, I don't think anybody anywhere knows what they're doing. And finally, you have the newest addition, the prestige adaptation. While I think that very few films so far can be put into this category besides the upcoming Legend of Zelda and Elden Ring movies, this leads us to another majorly important new route for video game adaptations: prestige TV. Now, video game TV show adaptations have been around for a long time. Shows like Pokemon and Sonic have been pretty crucial in the larger success of the games. Plus, there have literally been hundreds of anime adaptations of video games, so much so that it's almost a cottage industry in Japan. But in the last few years, things have majorly evolved. The Last of Us show was a huge phenomenon, and the blend of a big budget production with high quality acting, mixed with a fairly faithful recreation of the game, proved that the game itself had the quality of characters, story, and themes that don't need to be changed for a show that crossed over to audiences who had never played the game. Now, obviously, gamers have long said that great games don't need to be heavily changed to work as films, but shows like The Last of Us, as well as Fallout and Twisted Metal, have shown that remaining faithful to the worlds of the games can really work, with Fallout creating a story that remains canon in the game world without adapting a pre-existing story. I think that's really cool. The same goes for Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which told original stories in an existing world that became huge hits with fans. Some franchises lend really well to that original story set in the canon game world approach, and some don't. It seems like Zach Cregger's upcoming Resident Evil will take that approach. Will that work? I honestly don't know at the moment, but we'll see. Once studios figure out how to do true prestige films from games, you'll see another massive stage for where these adaptations can go. But whatever that might look like, there's always going to be one deciding figure on where studios are going to focus their time. What makes the most money? Here's something I think you can clearly see from both box office performance and audience reception, and not just my own preferences. In any adaptation, changes are going to need to be made. Video game storytelling and movie storytelling are 2 completely different types of media, even for video games that can be called cinematic. However, successful video game movies maintain the tone and style of the source material. Changing a goofy, silly game to a dark and gritty movie keeps audiences away. Refusing to include iconic elements from a game in the film version just because studio heads don't get it frustrates fans. The 2021 Mortal Kombat movie's biggest shortcoming is that it doesn't give us the tournament and focuses on a new character we don't care about. The Uncharted movie may have a lot of the elements and moments from the games, but de-aging Nathan Drake keeps us from really getting the character we want. Jamming together RE1 and 2 for Welcome to Raccoon City meant neither story really worked. Whatever you may personally think about them, recent movies like Five Nights at Freddy's, Sonic, Mario, and Iron Lung were exactly what you'd expect movie versions of those games to be, and so fans of the properties were very ready to show up for them. So, what do the next few years of video game movies look like? Well, there's actually quite a few movies that I'm pretty excited for, and I really hope turn out well. And if audiences are receptive and the box offices keep going strong, then I think you're going to see this cycle just get stronger and stronger as more and more studios focus on these big budget adaptations that make them a lot of money. At the time of releasing this video, Mortal Kombat 2 has just come out, but I'm actually making this in the past, so I don't know how well it's done. Hopefully it's great and is getting a lot of butts and seats at the theaters. After that, we've got Zach Cregger's Resident Evil, which already looks awesome as its own standalone film, but we'll see how it can do right by RE fans and also bring in a crowd after so many films that people didn't care about. Then we've got Street Fighter, which looks like a live-action cartoon, and I'm really interested to see how this big, crazy approach will work with people who aren't interested in the games. And finally, we've got Angry Birds 3, which kind of feels contractually obligated. Post-2026, there's really no signs of slowing down. And when you just look at game adaptations that have a release date attached, you've got Sonic 4, Legend of Zelda, Minecraft 2, Helldivers, Elden Ring, and Call of Duty. That's a huge slate of really big games, and also Helldivers, that covers the kids, mainstream, and prestige categories pretty well. I have a feeling that most of these movies are going to be big hits, and probably end up in the top 10 biggest films of the year for 2027 and 2028, plus new TV adaptations of God of War, Tomb Raider, and Assassin's Creed. After that, there are dozens and dozens of game adaptations that have been announced, but who knows if any of these are going to get made. It reminds me a lot of the early 2000s when comic book adaptations became all the rage after the first Spider-Man and X-Men movies, where every single comic book property got gobbled up as its rights were sold to whatever studio, at least for a limited amount of time, and a lot of those were never made. Will these game adaptations be made? We'll see, and I think the next few years are really going to define just how much growth there is in turning these rights for these properties into actual movies. Maybe there actually will be a Metal Gear Solid movie. This time, the Final Destination Bloodlines directors are attached, but you can only announce this so many times before I stop believing you. Outside of that, there are planned adaptations that range everywhere from, yeah, that makes total sense and could be really cool, like Bloodborne, Dredge, Ghost of Tsushima, and Streets of Rage, to why would anybody greenlight that, like Death Stranding, Just Dance, Pac-Man. But I think that as each new game adaptation succeeds at the box office, you'll see more and more announced. Not just sequels, but more franchises. I have a feeling that we'll eventually get a Super Smash Bros. Movie if the success of Galaxy and inclusion of Fox McCloud is any indication. What will be good, what will do well, and where is all this going? We'll just have to wait and see, but a new era of video game movies is here to stay, and its fate may just determine the future of theaters and movie studios. Thanks for watching today's video, and it's a bit of an unconventional one. Video game movies have been on my mind for a while and are something that I grew up with, and knew were really bad even from a young age. I think that first Super Mario Bros. Movie helped me realize that movies could in fact be bad. But in the years since, I've seen this whole adaptation craze go in a lot of different directions and go up and down in both box offices and quality of the movies. And thankfully, I think that there really has been a major turn in the last 5 to 10 years. It's a bit of a rocky path still, but this is a subject that has fascinated me for a while. And this year is a really big turning point for video game movies. Super Mario Galaxy, Mortal Kombat 2, Street Fighter. These are big ones, and if they do really well, I think there's going to be a massive shift in where studios are going to focus their time and money. I'm really excited about Mortal Kombat 2 in particular, and hopefully by the time this video is out, it's really good and has done really well. Also, I enjoyed the Super Mario Galaxy movie. I think it was really fun. People seem to think it was some sort of cancer for movies, but it was a really fun movie, so just chill. And 2027 and 2028 are going to have even bigger adaptations on the way, so we'll see where that goes. I'm really interested to see how they pull off a live-action Legend of Zelda movie. Seems like a really big challenge, but if it works, it's going to do great. I'd love to hear your thoughts on video game adaptations, your own favorite video game movie adaptations, and any games that you're really hoping will actually one day make it into being a film. And as always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support. If you'd like to be a member or patron, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews voted on by my supporters. So until next time, I hope you're taking care of yourselves and watching a Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil movie, because actually, I think there are a lot of good ones.